All right. Good morning, everybody. I'll go ahead and get started here. If you got your questions, go ahead and post them. Should be below the video if you're on a smaller screen, to the right of the video if you are on a larger screen. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So we just got a couple questions in there to start. Okay. So M. Hensley says, "What is your thoughts on keeping weight on front foot throughout the swing, stacking tilt?" I think that can work well for, um, for short game type shots, right? Because we're not looking for power, right? So if I'm just hitting like a little chip, weight forward, just kind of keep it forward, makes it easier, right, to make ball first contact because then you're not having to shift your weight. But if you want to have a more powerful swing, if you want to have good distance, um, I don't really recommend keeping your weight on your lead side throughout the swing because it's not a very powerful way to swing, right? Imagine a baseball pitcher who just stayed on their front foot, right, and did that, right? Well, that's kind of the equivalent of what you're doing. So when you don't need a lot of power for a less than a full swing, that is a 100% fine thing to do. It can actually help you to make better contact because you're more than likely, if you do it correctly, like obviously you can still chunk it. You can try to keep your weight on your lead foot and then still fall back and things like that. But if you execute it correctly, right, it may make you a little bit more consistent on the less than full swing shots. But if you want to have good power on your full swings, I don't really recommend it because it's just not a powerful way to move, right? It's not an athletic way to move. If you look at any powerful athletes in any sport, whether it's baseball, football, anything like that, they load up, they transfer their weight to their lead foot, and then they let it go, right? So if I'm throwing a baseball, I'm going to do that if I want to throw it with the most powerful possible, right? If I'm throwing a Hail Mary, right? If I'm the quarterback, I'm not going to throw a Hail Mary like this, right? I'm gonna load up, transfer, and then let it go, right? So we want to do that same thing in the golf swing. I want to load up in my trail foot and then move to my lead foot so that way I can push into the ground harder. If I keep all my weight on my lead foot throughout the swing, there's no energy transfer, which is not going to allow me to push into the ground quite as well. So you're going to lose power. Now, what I would say from that is if you get plenty of power from doing that, then more power to you, right? For no pun intended there, but then go ahead. If you can hit your irons as far as you want to, keeping your weight on your lead foot, then go right ahead. You have plenty of power. But keep in mind, you could most likely get more speed and distance if you transferred your weight and things like that. All right, let's keep going. So Dan A says, "Hey Q, what does not quitting on the shot mean? Does it mean to keep on rotating through impact or keeping the speed on through impact? I'm focusing on the impact position. I find that my body tends to stop there, making a full swing. Is that okay when I'm trying to learn the positions like in a compression line?" So if you're trying to break things down, to learn things, um, you know, that's fine. But when we're out on the course, we want to come around to a full finish. So that's really what we talk about in the power turn, right? So the power turn is not just turning your body in the backswing; it's also turning all the way through into a full finish, right? So if you're quitting on the shot, it basically means you're just not finishing your swing, right? So we want to make sure that we're coming all the way around into a full finish. Now, if you're breaking things down, let's say you're working on the compression line, you find that you're kind of hanging back and you come here and you pause, right? And you kind of feel this position, then you come all the way through. But when you actually do the full motion rep, you want to make sure that you're coming all the way around into a full finish. You're not quitting on the shot. All right, let's keep going. All right. So Billy W says, "Just watched a video of my swing. Hips are still not leading the swing. Any favorite drills to help accentuate hip rotation I desperately need. Thanks. So basically, most of the time when I see people that don't get the hips rotating like they should in the downswing, they early extend or whatever it might be, this is usually a reaction to trying to hit a functional shot, right? So what that means is if you were to actually rotate your body, if you change nothing else in your swing and you were to rotate your body, then you would hit a bad shot. So there's usually two reasons for this. It's either one of these two or both of these things. Number one is you're coming down steep, right? So if I start down steep in my swing, meaning the shaft is more kind of in a vertical position coming down, my hands are kind of too far out in front of me, or something like that. If I were to really lead with my lower body and rotate my body, well, look what happens to that club. That club just continues to come down steep and over the top. Now you're gonna hit poor shots, right? Maybe you're already coming down steep and over the top, and it would just make you come down even more over the top, right? And that's going to lead to poor shots. That's going to lead to pulls, hooks, slices, poor contact. It's going to lead to several issues that you don't want, right? So what a lot of people's solution to that, if the hands are going out too much, or this club is pitched too vertical, right? Then what a lot of people will do is they'll stop rotating their body and they'll actually start to stand up out of it. The hips will move toward the ball. And look what happens to the club when I do that, right? See how that club shallows out, right? And now I can hit a functional shot. Now, because I'm getting that club to come down shallow, I can hit a shot that goes relatively toward the target. My contact is more than likely going to improve. Now, is this the way that we want to shallow out the club? Is this the way the best players shallow out the club? No, it's not the way the best players shallow out the club, but I would much rather have somebody that shallows out the club than someone who doesn't, right? Because if you don't shallow out the club, you're going to have typically what high handicappers do, right? Is they don't shallow out the club, they come down steep. It's going to lead to poor contact. It's going to be very, very difficult to shoot low scores when you do that. But if you can get the club shallowing out, you can at least get the ball going toward your target. Now, it's typically going to be less consistent if you're doing it by virtue of standing up out of it, right? But it's still going to be way better. So that would be number one, right? So number one is we're starting down steep in the swing. Number two is the club face is open, right? So when you come down, if this club face is pointing up to the sky in any way at all, right? So basically, when this club is parallel to the ground in the downswing, when we look at the best players, right, that club face is angled down toward the ground some amount, right? Some players, it's a little bit more than others. Some players, it's very, very slight. So like an Adam Scott, his club face is just slightly angled down to the ground. You could even look at it, and you may even look at it to the naked eye. It may be straight up and down like this, right? But it's not pointing up to the sky at all. It's at least perpendicular to the ground or slightly angled down toward the ground. But most players are going to have that club face. Usually it's going to be pretty closely matching the posture, pretty close, right? So my back line, essentially, because if you kind of look at my back line, it's like this. The club face is like that. So back line is right here. It's like that. Club face is pretty closely matching that, right? So it's angled down toward the ground slightly, just like my posture is, right? And the reason why that is important is if I have this club face pointing up to the sky, which is a very common thing that I see among recreational golfers, if I have this club face pointing up to the sky, I've got to get that club face closed in some way, right? So what we want to understand is that lagging the club, that opens up the club face, right? So if I get the club behind my hands, that face is open if I keep it behind my hands, right? So see how that face is open? If I release the club, right? So that's the opposite of lag. If I release the club, right, that closes up the club face, right? So if I'm here and I have this club face open, I mean, this is a split second to the golf ball, right? So most people's solution to this is going to be to release the club, right? Because that's what you can do in a very short amount of time, right? Is you can release the club more to get the face open, to get the face square. So if I have this club face open and I release it, right? So if you look at it from this angle, open and I release it early, right? That's going to allow me to get the club face squared up, right? But when I do that, I have to stall my body, right? I can't keep rotating my body, because if I rotate my body, that's going to keep lag on the club typically, right? If I keep spinning around, right, the club's going to lag behind me. If I start turning and then I stop my body, that's going to help the club release, right? So what people will do is they'll have this face open, and then they'll stop their body so that way they can release the club earlier to square up the face, right? So we need to have this club face more closed as we're coming down, so that way we're incentivized to keep our body rotating, to get our hands a little bit more in front. We're still releasing the club. We're just keeping a little bit more lag on the club. So this club is more behind my hands as opposed to this. So this would be releasing early. I'm squaring up the face if I have an open face, right? If I were to have a closed face, right? So let's say I had this club face in a great position, but then I went like this. Well, look, my club face is too closed. I might hit my shin, right? That you're not incentivized to do that, right? So if you have this club face open, you're actually incentivized, in order to hit a good shot, you're incentivized to stall your body and throw your hands to square up the face. If you have this club face closed, you're not incentivized to do that. So you're actually going to be incentivized to keep your body rotating through. So having the club face in a better position, not having the face open, right? That's the other thing. So coming down steep and the club face open, one or both of those things is typically what's happening when we're not getting the body to turn through the shot. So if you want to work on those things, what I'd recommend doing is working through our 20-minute shallowing fix, because that addresses both of those things. In drill number 1, you're going to go through getting the club face closed, right? Because those two things really work together, how the club face is and shallowing out the club. Because if the club face isn't closed enough, right? If it's too open, you have no incentive to shallow out the club, right? If this face is open coming down, and I continue to shallow out the club, well, that ball's going to start right, keep going right, right? Intuitively, you're typically not going to let that happen. So if this face is open, a lot of times what people do is they'll come down steeply, right, to try to get that club face to match what they're doing, right? So the first thing we got to do is we got to get the club face closed. That's drill number 1. Drill number 2, once we get the club face closed, now we're incentivized to shallow out the club. Now we're incentivized to have more lag on the club. Now we're incentivized to rotate our body. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to do it. It just means that you're incentivized to do so. So that's really the first step, is you have to put yourself in a position where you are incentivized to rotate the body. Because if you're not incentivized, it will be near impossible to do it. It's very, very difficult to try to get your body to do something that leads to worse results, right? If you were to literally really rotate your body really well, you would hit terrible shots, right? But then, because your brain's thinking, well, I need to rotate my body because that's what the best players do, right? Well, the best players also are incentivized to do it as well, because of the positions they have the club. So 20-minute shallowing fixes would be what I would recommend. To get to that course, click the instruction tab, then click the 20-minute shallowing fix from there. So David S says, "Hi Q, I know it's hard without seeing a video of my swing, but any chance trying to shallow more could cause me to hit on the heel of the club?" Certainly could. So there could be a couple things going on there. So if you're someone who is used to coming down steep, right? So let's say you're coming down steep and over the top, right? Well, when you do that, your hands really kind of work to the left, work out to in early, right? The club is working toward you. So the sweet spot is working toward you, right? So if you've been doing that for a long time, you've essentially learned to hit the ball out of the center of the face when the club and the sweet spot of the club is working toward you, right? Well, if we start shallowing it, well, now that's going to be the opposite. The club head is going to be working away from you. Your hands are going to start turning around the corner later, right? So if I'm steeping over the top, my hands are already kind of working to the left by this point, if I'm pretty extreme with it, right? But if I'm shallow, my hands are working out to the right, and then they don't start working to the left later, right? So when my hands are working out away from me and the club is working out away from me, if you've if you calibrated your body or you've learned to hit the ball at the center of the face when you're coming over the top, well, now when you get the club working out away from you, you may start hitting it in the heel. So basically, what you need to do is you need to calibrate your body to hit the ball in the center of the face when you're shallowing out the club. And the way that you do that is by changing your intention, right? So right now, what I would have you do, if you are shallowing out the club, everything looks great. What I would have you do is I would have you try to hit the ball off the toe, intentionally hit the ball off the toe. Change your intention of where you're hitting on the face. Because right now you're trying to hit the center and you're hitting it in the heel. If you're not trying to hit this in the center, then I would focus on that and see if that can actually help you to hit it in the center. Because you may be just swinging the club and just hoping for the best. So what I would do is I would actually put some intention on it, put some focus on hitting it in the center of the face, and then it may just help by itself. But if you tried that and you still hit it in the heel, then I'd be trying to hit it in the toe. Change your intention to hitting it on the toe. When you change your intention to hitting on the toe, when you have a heel bias, meaning you have a tendency to hit the ball off the heel, then what I would do, then what's going to tend to happen is you're going to start hitting the ball out of the center of the face. Now, you're not going to have to do this forever. Eventually, you're going to adapt, and that your intention of hitting it on the toe is actually going to start happening. So once you start hitting the ball off the toe, at that point, you can start to ease off of it, right? You can start to gradually hit it less off the toe. But the moment you start going in the heel again, you got to start trying to hit the ball off the toe. But eventually, it's going to work itself out. Now, if you are over shallowing out the club, you got this club way too far, way too shallow, then the sweet spot's working away from you too much. And that may be where, okay, we need to ease off on the shallowing a little bit. But if you're shallowing it out the amount that you want, then we need to try to hit the ball off the toe. If you're over shallowing it, then just ease off on the shallowing so much. And that should help you to hit it more in the center of the face. But that's pretty normal. All right, let's keep going. So David S says, oh, sorry. So Gene H says, please consider sending your reply to Billy W as one of your videos. I think his issue is also exactly mine, and I suspect so many other subscribers. Yeah, I've talked about it many times. Basically, almost every office hours, somebody asks me about opening up the hips. And, without seeing your swing, I can't really tell for sure. But it's usually because you're coming down steep and the face is open. I've talked about it also in many other videos. So if you want to check it out, let me see if I can find a video that I did on this. I haven't made a video in a while as far as outside of office hours. So I'm trying to think where one would be. Bear with me here. I'm just looking for a video since we don't have any questions at the moment. If you got any questions, feel free to post them. All right. Well, I can't find. I was trying to think. I know there's a video where I've talked about it. I just can't think of it right now. Anyway, but yeah, keep your questions coming. So Mike G says, Q, looking at pro player swings down the line, I see that the head actually drops down at impact. Can you describe the dynamic that leads to that and why we amateurs never really get to that position at impact? Yeah. So basically, what's happening is, where's my clip? There we go. They don't drop down probably as much as you think, but they're really more or less kind of staying in their posture. So basically, what's happening is when they get up to the top of the swing, the hips are going to flex, right? And then they're going to go into right side bend. So if you imagine if I'm just standing up like this and then I flex my hips, right? So that's making the angle between my legs and my upper body smaller. If I do that, my head's going to move down, right? Also, what happens is they go into right side bend. So if you look here, if I go into right side bend, my head's going to lower, right? So those things are happening. We're going to go up to the top. I'm going to flex my hips, right? And then I'm going to go into right side bend as I come down into impact. That's really what's happening, right? So my hips are going to flex. Now, at the top of the swing, my left leg, my lead leg, is going to flex and move in while my right leg extends, right? And then the start of the downswing, I'm really that left leg is going to remain flexed and bow out while my right leg flexes, right? So that's going to look like that with the knees, right? And then my hips are going to flex, right? So that's here, that's the start of the downswing, right? And then from there, I'm going to push into the ground with my lead leg. And I'm going to keep my left hip lower. So that way, when I push into the ground, it actually rotates my body, right? So if I get here and then I push into the ground and push my left hip up, that's not going to rotate my body. I need my left hip to really push to stay low. So that way, when I push into the ground, it pushes my hip back and it rotates my body. And then I'm going to get right side bend as I come into contact. So that's essentially what happens. When we see people, recreational golfers that don't drop down, what's happening is they're extending their hips to start the downswing. They're straightening out their legs to start the downswing, right? So that's going to look like this, right? So my legs straighten out here, right? My legs straighten out, my hips extend, right? Early in the swing. And then when I come into contact, I'm not gonna be down lower. I'm gonna have to throw the club at the ball. So there's lots of reasons why this can happen. The first, as I mentioned before, usually it's a reaction to the club face and the club. It's your solution. It's usually it's a golfer's solution to getting to hitting a functional shot. Now, what do the best players do? The best players shallow out the club with their upper body. So let's talk about that a little bit. The best players shallow out the club with their upper body, and they actually steepen the club with their lower body, right? Recreational golfers tend to do the opposite, right? They actually steepen the club with the upper body, and then shallow out the club with the lower body, right? So what are the shallowing moves, right? Well, we can start from the ground up. If I extend my hips forward, right? So if I have this club like this, if I'm like this, and then I extend my hips forward, that shallows out the club. If I bump my hip forward, see how that shallows out the club, right? So bumping the hip, that shallows out the club, right? So that's what the lower body essentially what that does. With the upper body, what shallows out the club is my spine, right? So if I tilt with my spine, you can see how that's going to shallow out the club, right? My shoulder joints shallow out the club, right? So if I go like this, if I losing arm wrestling contest with my trail arm, win an arm wrestling contest with my lead arm, that shallows out the club. My forearms shallow out the club. So you can think of this as turning a doorknob, right? So if I pin my elbows to my side and I turn a doorknob, that shallows out the club. My wrists, if I bow my lead wrist and extend back my trail wrist, that can shallow out the club, right? So those are all things that can shallow out the club. Lowering the arms can shallow out the club, right? So if I just kind of lower my arms, that gets the club more shallow, right? If I keep my arms up, that's going to be steep. If I lower my arms, that shallows out the club. So the best players in the world, they shallow out the club with their lower body, and then they steepen they shallow out the club with their upper body, and then they steepen with their lower body. So what are the steepening moves? So steepening would be staying in your posture, right? So flexing the hips, right? Rotating the body, rotating the lower body. That steepens the club, right? It's basically the opposite with the upper body, right? So if I don't get any spine until I keep my spine pretty much straight up and down, that's going to steepen the club. Or if I go the other way, right? If I go to the top of the swing and I go like this, right, that's going to steepen the club. If I pull my elbows down, right, so if I kind of start down and I go like this, right, that's going to steepen the club. If I rotate my arms this way, that's going to shallow out the club. If I keep my arms up, that's going to steepen the club, right? So that's what a lot of recreational golfers do. A lot of recreational golfers keep their arms up as they start down. Their elbows kind of point behind them as they're starting down. They rotate the club out, right? And then they try to counteract that by standing up out of it, bumping the hips forward, and kind of going like this with their lower body, right? The best players tend to let their arms lower down as when they start the downswing. They'll get this club shallowing out with the upper body, right? So the elbows will point out toward the ball. The forearms will rotate. They'll tend to have better wrist angles. If I cup my wrist and go that way, right, that's going to steepen the club. If I bow my wrist and go that way, now you don't need to bow your wrist, but that does shallow out the club, right? So you need to have some combination of things that shallow out the club to get it to be in a shallow position. If I were to do all of the things that I talked about, so if I max out my spine angle here, with my right side bend, if I max out everything, right, I lower my arms down, this is too steep. This is too shallow. Excuse me. I won't really be able to hit the ball from here. So I need to have some amount of that paired with how much I'm rotating, right? So that's really what the difference is in what you're going to see with those players. All right, let's keep going. So Troy P says, I tend to lean my body forward on the backswing. Is that bad? No. You should go into left side bend. Right now, obviously, you can do this excessively. Now, if you do it excessively, you're usually going to fall down, right? So if I were to excessively kind of move forward, I would be very much out of balance, excuse me. But if I'm set up here and then I go up to the top and I'm like this, and I got some left side bend, right? That's where I want to be. So if that's what you're talking about, you're in good shape. Otherwise, I'm not sure what you mean by the leaning. But it sounds like you're just kind of staying in your posture from what you mentioned. All right, so Blue Note says, like you asked this before, and I forgot the answer. My 14-year-old son is a beautiful swing, and and a hood, some really nice shots. Then we'll get a case of the tops or the fats. The advice I'm giving him is to try and get off the rear side a little bit earlier and engage the hips a bit more. Acknowledging that without seeing his swing, you couldn't really say just advice and seem reasonable, or you just need more information. Yeah, so if you're topping the ball and hitting fat shots, then it usually means that the bottom of the swing arc. So what I would try to have him do is have him understand the bottom of the swing arc and where that needs to be, right? And then you would make moves in the swing in accordance with that, right? So what you did there, you're probably on the right track. I mean, odds are that probably is good advice from because typically if we're not getting off of our trail side, it's going to hard to get the bottom of our swing to be where it needs to be. It's going to tend to be too far away from the target. But it's much easier if we have an understanding of what's causing the issue. So that way you can more easily accept it. So what I'd recommend doing is get a hula hoop, because it's much easier to explain this if you have a visual reference. So this hula hoop is going to represent how the club arcs down to the ball, right? So the club arcs around, it works around in a circle, right? So there's a bottom of this circle. There's a low point to this circle. We want the bottom of this circle to be ahead of a few inches and slightly below the ball. So if my fist is the ball, right, and we're hitting in this direction, that's where we want the bottom of the swing to be. We want it to be ahead of, where this tape is here. We want it to be ahead of a few inches and slightly below the ball, right? So if you're staying on your trail side, right, and coming into contact kind of like this, right, then, or if you're just kind of coming into contact like this, you're very flat-footed as you're coming in, which you can still get your low point forward if you're flat-footed. But generally, if we're flat-footed, we're going to be more on our trail side. That's going to move the low point of the swing more away from the target. If you're hitting fat and thin shots, it's usually or fat and top shots. It's usually because the bottom of this swing is like this, right? We're hitting this direction. The bottom of the swing is happening before the ball, right? So if the bottom of the swing is happening before the ball, if my arc is too high, I'm going to top it. If my arc is too low, I'm going to be into the ground before the ball. So I need that to be forward, right? So that way I can hit the ball, then the turf after the ball. So getting off of the trail side definitely helps with that, right? But typically, a lot of times what people are doing is they're staying on their trail side for some reason. A lot of times it's to give more time to square up the face. If I'm here and I stay here, I have a little bit more time to stop my hands to get the club face square if it's open, right? Whereas if I were to really shift my body forward, that face may tend to get too open. I may hit it to the right. So if I had to guess, what's happening is most likely hanging back in the swing as a way to get the club face more closed. So I would evaluate, what's going on with the club face. Get that club face. When you look at it, when the club's parallel to the ground, the downswing, what does that club face look like? We'd like to see it angled down toward the ground some amount. If it's angled toward the sky, then most likely what's going on is he's probably trying to hang back to give himself a chance to stall his body to flip the hands so that way he can square it up. Because if he actually got off his trail side and got forward, he'd probably hit the ball way to the right. So you may just be replacing chunk and top shots with big, huge slices, right? So I would kind of look at, evaluate what the root cause is to what's going on there. So Ted says, hey, Q, can you demonstrate what your hands do on the downswing, specifically where the butt end of the grip points during the entire downswing? I hook and slice. I can't find a good impact position. So let's talk about where the butt end of the club is pointing. I think that can help you. So we'll talk about it from both angles here. So when we go up to the top of the swing, so let's do down the line first. So when we go up to the top of the swing, where's the butt end of the club pointing? Well, if you have a longer swing, it may, if you have a long, you're flexible, maybe you have a long swing, it's going to be pointing up to the sky somewhat. If you're not as flexible, it may be pointing down to the ground somewhat, right? So that's about whether getting it parallel or past parallel. Either one of them is fine. Um, but as far as where the club is pointing, you can be across the line or so when I say across the line, what I mean is when you're at the top of the swing, across the line would be this, where the club's kind of pointing off that way, whereas laid off would be this. So if you have a shorter swing, you're going to tend to want to be more in a laid off position. If you have a longer swing, you're going to be more in a cross position, right? If you're basically right at parallel, you're probably going to be in more of a neutral position, right? So meaning the club's basically pointing right toward the target. That part of the club, right? This one will be pointing directly away from the target, right? So that can lead to the issues because let's say you have a shorter swing, right? You're not getting to parallel, but then this club's way across the line at the top. That's going to make it very difficult for you to shallow out the club because you just don't have a lot of time to get that club into a good position. So that could be leading to, if you're starting down steep and you're trying to shallow it out late, or you're continuing to come down steep, that can lead to the hooks and the slices, right? Because if I come down over the top and my face is open, I'm going to slice it. If I come down over the top and my face is closed, I'm going to hook it, right? So that'd be kind of what I'd be looking at there. And then as we come down to here, so this is club parallel to the ground, right? Well, actually, let's keep going here. So lead arm parallel to the ground. We'd like to see the butt end of the club be pointing at or a little bit outside the ball. So if it's in like this, it's typically going to be too steep, right? So that could be part of what's going on, kind of like what I was talking about. If you're kind of like across like this, then you pull it down to here, then you're trying to it's just going to make it more difficult. So having that butt end of the club pointing a little bit outside the ball or at the ball would be a good position. And then when we come down to club parallel, we want to see the butt end of the club pointing slightly right of the target, right? And then at impact, basically the butt end of the club is going to be pointing kind of outside your left hip, right? Now, if you look from face on, right, butt end of the club is going to be pointing away from the ball. It's going to continue to work away from the ball as we start down, right? So I'm here, and I want to actually increase that angle. That's going to be lag, right? Now from here, I'm going to start releasing that a little bit. And when I get to club parallel to the ground, it's going to be that's typically going to be where my hands are in front of my trail thigh when we're looking for face on. If we're already club parallel to the ground before our hands are getting to our legs, it typically means we're casting the club, right? So we typically want to be kind of in this area here. So somewhere either here to here is going to be good. When we look at the better players, it's usually that the lead hand is in front of the thigh or both hands are in front of the thigh. Usually it's not where both hands are outside of the trail thigh. It's typically going to be a little bit more of an early release as you're coming out. You're typically going to come down with less shaft when you come into contact. Then when we come into contact, again, that button in the club is going to be pointing out. So if you're struggling with hooks and slices, what I'd recommend doing is working through the 20-minute shallowing fix because odds are you're just coming down steep and you need to work on getting the club shallowed out. So that's what I would recommend doing. Work through the 20-minute shallowing fix, get the club face in a better position, get that club working into a better position. You don't have to memorize all these positions. It's good to kind of know when you're looking at your swing, but when you're actually working on your swing and trying to swing the club, there's just no way you can think about, okay, I need to have it here. The things are happening so fast, right? So the 20-minute shallowing fix allows you to kind of to be able to work through those things without really having to think about them. And you're going to be getting into those positions if you work through the drills correctly without you really having to think, okay, at this point in the swing, the club's here. This point in the swing, the club's here. So that's what I'd recommend working through as a 20-minute shallowing fix. To get to that course, click the instruction tab, then click the 20-minute shallowing fix from there. All right, let's keep going. So Brett W says, hello, Qster. What is the proper shoulder rotation with an iron? More horizontal than vertical. More horizontal than vertical. So you're talking about, I think you're talking about like maybe the shoulder plane, right? So are you kind of talking about like this, where this would be horizontal, this would be vertical? So it's going to be incline, right? So the easiest way to kind of think about this, as far as like the shoulder plane is concerned, like where it needs to be. So if I set up here, right? Where my shoulders are going to point at the top of the swing, it's typically going to be somewhere within between 4 and 8 feet outside the ball, right? So if I get my setup here, right, and then I put my club across the shoulder, and you can test this. And when you do test this, if you test this, make sure when you put the club across your shoulder that you're putting it on top of your shoulders. When I see a lot of people do these shoulder turn type stuff, what they'll do is they'll hold it like right here or down in the elbow pits, and we don't want to put it there because then our arms can pushing our arms in and out or whatever can dictate where the club's pointing. Whereas if I put it on top of my shoulders, right, it's actually going to be more representative of how much my shoulders are turning and where they're pointing, right? Because it's going to give me a much better idea. So if you look here, I actually have it's up against my neck. It's above my collarbone here. It's up against my neck. It's sitting on top of my shoulders. So we don't want to have it here. I want it up here. I want it basically choking you. All right. So get in your address position here. Stay in your posture, right? Your setup posture. Put that on top of your shoulders and then turn, right? And the top of the swing here, that club is going to be pointing somewhere between 4 and 8 feet outside the ball. That's where it's going to be pointing at the top. Now, as you come through impact, it's going to be a little bit steeper, right? As you come through, when we look at the better players, it's typically a little bit steeper with the shoulder turn as they're coming through. But in the backswing, it's typically going to be 4 to 8 feet outside the ball. So if I were to get in my set position here again, let's say I were to go to the top and then it's like this, right? Well, look what I've had to do that. I've had to move my hips forward and I've had to kind of stand up out of it. So I've come up out of my posture basically to get my shoulders level. We want to stay in our posture, right? If we were to draw a line on the front of our head and on our backside, we basically want to maintain those lines, our head on that line and our backside on that line as we go up to the top. Now, if you come off of them a little bit on each way, that's fine. But when you look at the better players, they're usually pretty good at maintaining those lines throughout the swing, right? So those would be, that's what we refer to as staying in the posture, right? So if your shoulders are getting level, then that means that you're more than likely standing up. You're losing those lines. You're not staying in your posture. All right, we got about 15 minutes left. If we have any more questions, keep them coming. Oh, sorry, I think I skipped Mike's question. All right, so Mike D says, can you demonstrate what would be some good warm-up type swings before you begin a range session to get the body loose and prepare to swing the club fast? Maybe show us how you prepare for a range session. So basically what I do is I just start hitting short shots. I'll start out with like a 30-yard pitch and then go up to like a 50-yard pitch, hit a few of those, then 70-yard, I just kind of work up. I start with basically a pretty short swing, right? A swing that would be, a 30-yard pitch would probably be, basically like this, right? And then I kind of work up to like a 50-yard pitch, right? And then I work up to a longer pitch, right? And I just hit a few shots at every. So I'll hit like 5 or 6 30-yarders, 5 or 6 50-yarders, 5 or 6 75-yarders. And then at that point, I'm basically ready to kind of build it up to full swing, right? So that's how I do it. Now, if you have certain things that become stiff all the time, let's say you have really stiff wrists, or let's say you have really stiff knees or things like that, you may need to do things specifically for you that kind of get you ready. But for me, what I find is just starting out with shorter, slower swings and then building that up to longer and faster swings. That gets me warmed up and ready to go. And when I go to, I went to several, like I went to the Arnold Palmer, I went to the Players Championship this year, and I watched a lot of guys warmed up, and they do a lot of the same stuff. Now, some of them may have some specific things that they do to like stretches. Like you see a lot of them like do this with their wrist to kind of get the wrist kind of warmed up. That's really up to you if you find that helps you. But I never really found like that helped me a lot. I found that just swinging the club itself and just starting out with shorter and slower swings and building up got me plenty warmed up. But if you find that there's a difference between you doing this, right, and you maybe doing some toe touches or whatever, if that gets you more prepared to do it, then great. But it doesn't. I've never really found that really makes any difference for me. So I'm not going to waste my time doing it. I'm just going to start, get a feel for the club and swinging the club. So that's kind of what I'd recommend. But like I said, if you have really stiff joints, then there may be some specific things that you would want to do. Like I said, if your wrists are really stiff, like this is a pretty good one to do if your wrists are pretty stiff, right? If you have stiff shoulders, right, doing arm circles is good. So going like this and then going back the other way just to get the blood flowing into your shoulders a little bit. If you have really stiff hamstrings, it may be good to kind of do some toe touches, right, to kind of feel, may not be able to touch your toes, but at least like try to get a stretch in those to try to get get the blood flowing within, that sort of thing. So those will all be things that you can do. But as far as just warming up in general, shorter, slower swings, building up to longer, faster swings is kind of what I would recommend generally. And if you have some things you specifically need to do, you can do that as well. All right, let's keep going here. Like I said, we got about 10 minutes or so left. So Brett W says, oops, sorry. Dan S says, any idea of the effects of rain on the ball? Notice I was hitting shorter, but also had trouble with grip. Yeah, so it can affect the spin of the ball. So with a shorter club, so like wedges, higher lofted clubs, the ball will slip more, and you won't get as much spin. But actually, on longer clubs that have, I don't know where exactly the threshold is, but Ping study this. But on longer clubs, you'll actually get less spin, right? And it's something about can't remember exactly the reason why, but like for like a 5-iron, for example, a lot of times a 5-iron will go farther, all things equal, in the rain because there'll be less spin. Um, uh, and that leads to longer distances. So shorter clubs are going to tend to spin less uh, because it's going to slip on the face, and then because of that, the longer clubs will also go farther because they're going to carry farther. So keep that in mind. If you're looking to get some spin and you're in wet conditions, with a wedge, you're not likely going to get it. Now, if it's raining, usually the conditions are going to be softer, so that's going to help. You may not need as much spin, but if you're looking for that kind of like one hop and stop kind of shot, it's going to be difficult to get with wet conditions. So Justin G says, "Hey Q, I'm sure you guys have analyzed Sky Scheffler's swing. A lot has been said about his feet moving around, but I'm curious as to your take on how he gets the club to playing consistently, as it seems like it is a bit steep at the top. Is it like Mickelson, etc., and just uses the athleticism to make efficiently unrepeatable?" He shallows out the club. I don't think it looks steep. It's shallowing out nicely. Uh, so, I mean, I think Scheffler's got a great swing. It's definitely unorthodox, compared to a lot of others, but he shallows out the club nicely. I think it just proves that your feet can move around. They don't have to stay completely planted on the ground. He's just being an athlete and just swinging the club around his body. So, obviously, it works pretty well for him. He's one of, if not the best ball striker on tour from a statistical standpoint. So, um, yeah, I wouldn't say he's like Mickelson. Mickelson, I would say he starts down steep and then shallows it late, which works fine for him. But that's not what Scheffler's doing. Scheffler's getting that club shallowed out pretty quickly, pretty early in the swing. It's hard to be an elite ball striker if you're not. Um, so I will say, if anything, it kind of proves that just kind of go back to Sky Swing. What we talk about is there's really only so many things that matter the most in the golf swing, right? There's lots of things that matter in the golf swing, but when you're talking about when you're ranking the importance of things, right? If you're ranking, okay, does he have a stable fluid spine? Well, yes, he does. Does he have a good shoulder turn, a power turn? Yes, he does. Is he lagging the club? Yes, he is. Is he um, does he have a good compression line? Is his hips are bumped out? His compression line looks good. Is he releasing the club out in front? Yes, he is. Is he shallowing out the club? Yes, he is. So he's nailing all of the things that we talk about. Everything in between there is really kind of your own secret recipe of things that work well for you. So that's kind of the whole idea is like a focus on the things that matter the most in the golf swing. There's lots of things that people focus on that are not the most important things, and they're focusing on things that aren't really going to necessarily help them play better golf, or maybe they are going to help them to be better, but it's going to be marginal compared to if they focus on more important things. So that's really what the top speed golf system message is all about. Like, okay, well, these are the things that are important in the swing. If you're doing these things, most likely you're going to be doing things in the swing pretty well. Like I said, I do lots of online lessons, and when I'm looking at a golfer, right, I can typically guess their handicap range um, pretty closely, usually within a few shots, because when you look at their swing, if they're nailing all the pieces of the top speed golf system, usually, in their shallowing out the club, usually that's going to be a scratch to low single digit golfer, right? Um, you add speed to that, that's a high level golfer. Now, if they don't have, I'm not saying I've never been wrong. I've definitely been wrong about it. I've had golfers that have beautiful golf swings, but they just don't have any skill. They don't, so their technique is good, right? So they're nailing the piece of the top speed golf, they're shallowing out the club, But you can have perfect technique and still hit really bad golf shots, and you can hit bad golf shots consistently if you don't have any control of what you're doing, right? So that's where the skill aspect comes in, right? So technique is how you move, skill is your ability to control the way that you move, right? So golf is a game of precision. So if you're dimple off here and there, right, your ball flight's going to be way off. So I've worked with lots of people that are really worried about trying to get all their swing. Like I have a student right now; he's a 10 handicap. It's going down, which is good. He broke 80 for the first time recently, but um, he's really fixated on his swing. He has a beautiful golf swing. I mean, if you could put his swing up against many pros, and it stacks up really well with them, but he's so focused on that. But the reality is that he really needs to work on his skill, his ability to control things, right? And then his short game and his putting isn't the greatest, right? So that's really what's not allowing him to excel. So it's about focusing on the correct things that are actually going to help you to play better. So you know the top speed golf system is what kind of looks at that. So you can look at Dustin Johnson, you can look at John Rahm, you can look at Ricky Fowler, Wyndham Clark, all of these guys, right? And the gals too. You look at all the women in golf, you look at all of them, they're all doing the top speed golf system, every single one of them. Now they don't know that they're doing. Most of them, I would figure, pretty much all of them don't even know we exist. But they're all doing the things that we say all the best players do, right? But hey, their golf swings look very different, right? Nelly Cordes' swing looks a lot different than Dustin Johnson and John Rahm and Minjee Lee and all these. I mean, you're going across the board of the best players. The golf swings look very, very different, but they're all doing the essential pieces of the swing. So if you focus on the essential pieces of the swing, you'll be in better shape for it. If you're focusing on getting your takeaway to be perfect, you're focusing on your getting the club to perfectly parallel, keeping your left arm straight, and things like that. Those aren't the essential things in the swing. That's not to say that they won't help you. They certainly could help you, right? But it also could have an opposite effect. It may make things worse, right? So if you work on the things that that we know specifically help all players, like the top speed golf system, like the shallowing fix, like the 20-minute distance fix, you want to get speed, right? You're working on things that are definitely going to work you toward being better instead of guessing what's going to make you better. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. Thanks everybody for joining me. We'll be back here tomorrow, Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to y'all next time.